Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, General Scowcroft and Mr. Berger, we appreciate you coming here today, and we appreciate your insight and your experience. I respect both of you. I especially appreciate Mr. Berger's insight into the creation of the intelligence component at Homeland Security. It's something Senator Graham and I have been working with both Senator Lieberman, Senator Thompson, the White House, and others to create what Mr. Berger described. We think it's very important. Without it, we doubt that Homeland Security could be what it needs to be to deal with that. So I appreciate your insightful remarks. I would like to pick up on what first what Senator Rockefeller was talking about. We all respect the FBI. We know the FBI has no peer when it comes to forensic science, you know, and investigations and stuff. I believe they're great, and they've got great people there. And I believe Director Mueller is bringing leadership down there. But we'll have to measure that with time. Having said that, Mr. Berger, on page 6 of your testimony, and I'll quote again, and it's similar to what you said earlier. I do believe the CIA was focused on the counterterrorism mission. What we've learned since 9/11 makes clear that the FBI as an organization was not as focused. Director Mueller has acknowledged these problems. Until the very end of our time in office, this is the Clinton administration, we received from the Bureau was that Al-Qaeda had limited capacity to operate in the U.S. and any presence here was under surveillance. Gosh, I'm not going to have to comment on that, you know, but that's disturbing. And I think your remarks were true, ring true. I'd like to get into something else now, Mr. Berger. First, I'll direct some questions at you. I have some observations to make first. In August 1998, after Al-Qaeda bombed our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, President Clinton had strong words about how we must deal with the terrorist threats. He declared, and I'll quote, that countries that persistently host terrorists have no right to be safe havens. Our battle against terrorism, he said, will require strength, courage, and endurance. He pledged, that's President Clinton, that we, and I quote, will not yield to this threat. We will meet it, no matter how long it may take. This will be a long, ongoing struggle. We must be prepared to do all that we can for as long as we must. President Clinton also went on and said, he warned that the risk from inaction from America and the world would be far greater than action, for that would embolden our enemies, leaving their ability and their willingness to strike us intact. President Clinton went on to say, and he promised, there will be no sanctuary for terrorists. We will persist and we will prevail. Those were very strong words. I agreed with it. I welcomed it. And they sound a lot to me like what President Bush has said recently and said well, and said just before we destroyed the Taliban regime in Afghanistan with overwhelming force. By the time he spoke those words, President Clinton, if I recall right, had already, or about that time contemporaneous with, launched a missile strike upon a camp in Afghanistan and a pharmaceutical factory in the Sudan. After that speech, Mr. Berger, what steps did the administration take to fight a decisive, clear battle against terrorism?
Well, Senator, as you point out, first of all, after the attacks on our embassy in Afghanistan and in Kenya and Tanzania, there were 12 Americans killed, many more Africans. Quite soon, within 2 weeks, we had developed very good intelligence indicating that 200 to 300 bin Laden operatives would be at a fixed location with bin Laden. We attacked that facility. We killed many Al-Qaeda people. What I was told afterwards was that bin Laden probably had left a few hours before, indicating the difficulty of getting predictive intelligence, getting inside the intent cycle. We can talk about Sudan. I believe hitting that plant was the correct thing to do. Mm-hmm. I know that the Sudanese have paid a lot of money to lobbyists and public relations firms to try to portray it as a toothpaste factory. I'd be happy to make that case, if you'd like, as to why that was an appropriate target. From that point on,
that is a disputed.
It may be disputed, but I believe we were correct then, and I believe we're correct now. And
was there a dispute in the intelligence community? There was
no dispute.
Whether or not this was a military target.
There was no dispute presented to the principals or the president.
Okay.
That facility was one in which there was VX, chemical precursor found, which was owned by the Military Industrial Corporation of Sudan, which we knew was their vehicle for developing chemical weapons, which had received millions of dollars from bin Laden. Mm-hmm. And we've actually learned since from a Al-Qaeda operative that they were working with Sudan on chemical weapons in Khartoum. And I would much rather be defending the decision to hit that place than not having hit that place if 2 weeks later chemical weapons had shown up in New York City subway system or in Alabama. So as for that, I believe that was the right decision to make. We proceeded on the information that we received. Whether down in the bowels...
Do you believe that was good information?
I have gone back to the agency on a number of occasions because I've been defending this from time to time since, and at the highest level that information has been validated to me. Now, with respect to what else was going on, from 98 on, we were embarked upon a very intense effort to get bin Laden, to get his lieutenants, through both overt and covert means. I cannot discuss in this committee the covert efforts, which involved working with...
Let me go back. You say 98. What about, was it 96? Was he ever offered up by the Sudanese people? They told, I was recently, Senator Specter and I were in Khartoum. They told us that they offered him up to the Clinton administration and that y'all declined. Was that a real offer, or was that just talk, or what?
Senator, can I answer the last one and then get to the next one?
Sure.
If you ask them faster than I can answer them.
No, I can't do that.
You asked what we did after 98. We were involved. At that point, our intense focus was to get bin Laden, to get his key lieutenants. The President conferred a number of authorities on the intelligence community for that purpose.
I get him. That meant kill him if you had to. Capture
That's
or
correct.
Kill him or just capture?
I don't know what I can say in this hearing, but capture and kill until the chairman rules me out of order. It was no question the cruise missiles were not trying to capture him. They were not law enforcement techniques. Okay? We unfortunately, despite intense effort, had actionable intelligence only that time. Whether more could have been done to get more actionable intelligence, I don't know. We developed some new techniques at the end of 2000, some technical means to get corroborating information on bin Laden's whereabouts. Those were tested successfully in 2000. I don't know whether they were used again after 2000. So our focus was, in addition to breaking up Al-Qaeda cells around the world, in addition to a number of other things we were doing, our focus was getting bin Laden, A. B, putting pressure on the Taliban. We froze Taliban assets, about $250 million. We went to the United Nations. We got sanctions on the Taliban. We sent senior diplomats to meet with the Taliban and issue to them privately the same threat that President Bush issued publicly after September 11th. That is, if there was any further incident involving bin Laden, they would be held personally accountable as the Taliban. So I think that was an intense effort. I think that it was directed at personnel. It was not directed at jungle gyms or facilities. I think the judgment was to hit a camp and not get top bin Laden people would have made the United States look weak and bin Laden look strong. And I think the potential of going to war with Afghanistan before 9/11 was not something that I think was feasible. No one in this committee was seeking that, or I think elsewhere. Now, you ask about Sudan. There never was an offer, Senator, from Sudan to turn bin Laden over to the United States.
Were there discussions?
There was an effort in '96.
Were there discussions?
Yeah, there was an effort in '96 taking place. There were contacts with the Sudanese. Understand, Senator, the Sudanese government in the mid-'90s was one of the worst terrorist states in the world, maybe close to Iraq. They tried to assassinate Mubarak. They'd been engaged in a civil war in which 2 million of their people had been killed. They'd bombed their own people at feeding facilities. They practiced slavery and discriminated in gross ways against the Christian community in that. These were not nice people. That's point number one. Number two, they wanted to get off the terrorism list. We put them on the terrorism list in '93 because of all of this and many other things. They wanted to get off the terrorism list. And from time to time, they'd say, just, take us off the terrorism list and we'll be nice guys. We said, do something. Prove it. Get rid of bin Laden. Expel all these other groups. There never was, and I've spent a great deal of time on this since 9/11 because the questions come up more than once. Sure. There never was, and certainly no official I've talked to in any agency is aware of any offer by the Sudanese to turn him over to the United States. We pressed the Sudanese to expel him. We actually had discussions, I believe, with the Saudis and others about whether they would take him. They said no. But the Sudanese never offered that. They've said so since, most recently. And if I can say this in conclusion, if you think that Tarabi and Bashir, who were as vile a bunch of thugs as exist, was going to turn Osama bin Laden over to a hostile country, whether that was Saudi Arabia or the United States, I think that overestimates the kind of people we were dealing with. We gave them every opportunity from 1996 on, even after, let me just finish, Senator, even after bin Laden was expelled, to give us information, to turn over information. We met with them continually all over the world. They never gave us anything. Since 9/11, there's a bit of revisionism going on because they don't want President Bush to single them out as the next target. And there are obviously an attempt to rewrite history.
I think they've changed very much since September 11th last year.
Well, I'm just reading that they're now probably taking al-Qaeda resources back to Sudan. That is, they now, according to what I've read, even though that the Sudanese now, where the al-Qaeda are transferring gold and other materials, al-Qaeda resources. So it doesn't sound to me as if they've made much of a fundamental break, although they have had some negotiations with Senator Danforth about ending the Civil War.
Back in '96, had there been a decision made at that point in your discussions at the National Security Council to take, if you could, Osama bin Laden, dead or alive, if you could? Had that decision been made then, or was that?
I think in '96 that decision was never presented.
Been.
I think there had been a discussion, as I understand it, at the CSG, at the Assistant Secretary level, about could we find some place to take him? Could we take him here? Could we take him to Saudi Arabia? But those were hypothetical because we never had such an offer from the Sudanese.
But what I was getting
and in 1996, Senator, I don't believe that the law enforcement community had evidence linking him to attacks on the United States. We've subsequently found out since 9/11 that there may be linkages between bin Laden and World Trade Center 93 and other activities, but in '96 that was not the state of knowledge.
But in '96 you were very interested in him.
In '96 he was certainly on the radar screen. Okay. He was not as I would say this. In 96, he was on the radar screen. In 98, he was the radar screen.
He was. Okay. I want to shift over to Mr. Berger, something else I think you know something about. The White House Commission on Aviation Safety and Security, headed by Vice President Gore, as I understand, recommended that the U.S. develop and implement a system of airline passenger profiling. According to the Commission, and I quote, based on information that is already in computer databases, passengers could be separated into a very large majority who present little or no risk and a small minority who merit additional attention. These are techniques that the Customs Service has long used and which could have played an important role in preventing terrorists from being able to commit the attacks of September 11th. As I recall, and you might correct me, did anything ever come of the Commission's recommendation for doing this? In other words, were these recommendations
As I recall, Senator, the Commission was established after TWA 800, which at the time we thought was a terrorist act. We subsequently concluded that it was a mechanical failure. But I remember very well the night of the plane went down, and we were very concerned that it was a terrorist attack. And one of the things that President Clinton did was to appoint this commission to look at aviation security. That commission came up with a number of recommendations. My understanding is some were implemented, some were not implemented by the FAA, some were not implemented by the Congress. So I think I can't tell you piece by piece, since I was not directly involved in that, which recommendations were implemented, which died at the FAA and which died in the Congress.
Mr. Berger, the National Security Council sets priorities, as I understand it, and allocates to some extent resources to the most important issues. How high on the screen did fighting Al-Qaeda rank on your list of priorities up until the time, January 2000, that you left?
Well, I'll take this in a couple of stages, Senator. In 1995, the President issued PDD 35, which for the first time was an organized system of establishing intelligence priorities. And I think General Scowcroft has very well described the situation prior in the 80s, where the focus was more on the Cold War and more on the post-Cold War issues. So in 1995, we set up a system for setting and periodically reviewing intelligence priorities. At that point, intelligence was placed at a level exceeded only by support for military operations and a few key countries, such as Iraq. And at the same time, the President issued PDD 39, which essentially directed the agencies to give terrorism the very highest priority. So I think from 95 on, budgets started going back up. The focus was more intense. The bin Laden cell was set up at the agency. I guess he's probably the only terrorist that had his own acronym, a dubious distinction. We were obviously increasingly focused, and I think with 98, with the bombing of the African embassy, where for the first time the intelligence and law enforcement community was able to say to us, this is Al-Qaeda, this is bin Laden. That's the first time we've been able to have that kind of predicate. I think at that point, bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were among the highest priorities of our administration.